"Hey, you don't belong here!" The shout splits the calm of the morning. Runners slow, a dog barks, and eyes turn toward the voice dripping with anger. A man stands near the trail, pointing a finger that shakes more from prejudice than truth. "You think you can just come through here, running like that? Not in this neighborhood." The jogger halts mid-stride, chest rising fast from exertion. Words fail him, not because he's guilty, but because the accusation lands heavy, as though his skin itself is evidence. He swallows hard, jaw clenching, knowing this is not the first time and likely not the last. The air thickens, silence pressing in on him, until another echo comes. "People like you don't fit here." His lips part, but before a response can form, the neighbor's voice grows sharper, cutting across the stillness like a blade. Each phrase pushes him further into a corner he never chose. The jogger's heart pounds, not just from running, but from the storm that now gathers around him, a storm that refuses to let him pass. His breath comes shallow, though not from fatigue. He steadies himself, reminding his lungs to find rhythm again. The path he had taken for peace now feels like a trap. He glances left, then right, searching for escape, but every step seems to invite more stares. His pulse quickens, sweat mixing with unease as the neighbor edges closer. "You're acting nervous," the man sneers, mistaking fear for guilt. The jogger presses his palms against his thighs, grounding himself. He doesn't answer. He knows any word could be twisted, any sound replayed against him. Silence, though heavy, feels like his only shield. But silence never stays quiet for long. "You were casing houses, weren't you? I saw you circle the block," the neighbor spits, words sharp and reckless. The jogger shakes his head slightly, still refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. But the man presses harder, voice rising with each baseless claim. "Running this fast? Nobody runs like that unless they're running away from something. You think families feel safe with you charging through here?" A murmur ripples among onlookers. Some nod faintly, eager to believe the narrative offered. Others keep their gaze low, avoiding involvement, but the weight of complicity hangs in the air. The jogger bites back a response, knowing truth has no power against ears that have chosen lies. His silence becomes the neighbor's fuel. "See? Nothing to say. That tells me all I need to know." The words burn more than fists ever could. Phones lift, lenses glinting as bystanders capture fragments of the moment. Some whisper, half curious, half afraid. A few mutter stereotypes they've carried for years, words that pierce even when hushed. Yet most stay quiet. They shift uncomfortably, choosing passivity over confrontation. Silence becomes its own form of agreement, louder than any insult hurled. One child tugs at his mother's sleeve. "Why's everyone yelling at him? He's just running." The innocence in that voice freezes the crowd for a moment. But no one answers. The stillness after the question is louder than the shouts. The ew. Jogger feels the weight of every stare, every recording device, every word left unsaid. The world's gaze is on him, yet no one truly sees him. His fists clench at his sides, nails pressing into skin. Heat floods his face, but not from the run. His body trembles under the humiliation of standing trial without defense, without crime. His eyes burn, caught between fury and despair. He wants to speak, to shout his truth, but the words choke on shame forced upon him. He imagines sprinting again, breaking free from the stairs, but his legs stay rooted. The neighbor circles his, narrative like a vulture, feasting on silence while the crowd becomes both jury and spectator. The jogger lowers his gaze, not in surrender, but to hold back tears he refuses to let fall here, in this arena of judgment. Dignity feels fragile, yet it is all he has left. Inside, his rage demands release. Every insult begs for retaliation. Every slur claws at his pride. Yet he stands still. He knows what they want, a reaction that would confirm their fears, validate their whispers. He refuses. Instead, he takes the blow of silence, letting it bruise but not define him. The decision costs him dearly, each second stretching into eternity. He swallows the fire, holding it within, waiting for the moment it will be used not to destroy, but to reveal. At last, he lifts his head. The crowd sees his face clearly now. Strong features, familiar to millions, but unrecognized here. Usain Bolt, the fastest man alive, standing still, stripped of motion by prejudice. His jaw tightens, eyes narrowing, not at the insults but at the blindness before him. They don't see greatness. They don't see a champion. To them, he is only what their fear has painted him to be. And as the whispers swell, the story edges toward a past that shaped him long before this park. Breathe in. Breathe out. His voice was barely a whisper as he bent to tie his laces, the rhythm of the knot steadying his thoughts. The sun had barely risen, the streets still wrapped in silence, and this was his sanctuary. Running wasn't about medals anymore. The cheers of packed stadiums had long faded, replaced by something quieter: peace, discipline, survival. He stood, stretching his arms as though shaking off the weight of yesterday. To others, it was just exercise. To him, it was armor. Each stride ahead was less about speed and more about grounding, reminding himself that motion meant freedom, even when the world insisted on placing invisible chains. But even freedom came with shadows. He remembered the roar of the crowd, the flash of cameras, his name echoing around the globe. Gold medals gleamed not just on his chest, but in the hearts of millions who saw possibility in his stride. Yet outside the arena, celebration had a way of vanishing. On city streets, he noticed clutched handbags when he walked past. In shops, suspicious stares followed him as though excellence could be erased by skin. Neighbors whispered just low enough to pretend it wasn't meant for him, but the sting carried. "Funny," he muttered once after a stranger crossed the road. "I broke records for humanity but can't cross the street without suspicion." The contrast never left him. Glory on the track, quiet degradation off it. The park had once been his haven. The soft thud of shoes against the trail, the wind carrying away stress, the simple rhythm of life reduced to breath and pace. Here, he felt untouchable. Or so he thought. Lately, the stares followed him even here. Neighbors leaned against fences, conversations halting as he passed. What used to be nods of recognition had soured into narrowed eyes, as though running itself was an offense. He tried to ignore it, telling himself, "It's just a park, just grass and pavement." But the way they looked at him turned peace into pressure, a reminder that no place stays safe when prejudice decides to move in. Even tranquility had an expiration date. For years, he'd been called a hero. Children wore his number. Adults called him an inspiration, his name synonymous with greatness. But here, none of that mattered. The world's fastest man was reduced to suspicion, stripped of recognition. His records couldn't shield him, nor could fame erase bias. He carried a truth few wanted to face. No accomplishment could outrun racism. It shrunk him, invisibly but relentlessly, until even his victories felt stolen from his grasp. Every morning he wrestled with the duality: respect abroad, rejection at home. Applause from millions versus silence from neighbors. The dissonance carved at him, leaving an ache deeper than fatigue. And though he pressed forward, he knew the collision between dignity and prejudice was coming. It was only a matter of time. "Hey, hold up a second!" The voice came sharp, authoritative, carrying more accusation than concern. Usain slowed, sweat dripping from his brow, heart still steady from the rhythm of his run. The neighbor, a middle-aged man with the confidence of someone used to giving orders, stepped into his path. Arms crossed, chin lifted, his words landed like stones. "You can't be tearing through here like that. Running that fast, people are bound to think something's wrong. You're drawing attention." Usain blinked, catching his breath, trying to measure the intent behind the words. "I'm just running. It's a public path." The neighbor smirked. as though the explanation was an insult. I'm the HOA leader. My job is keeping this place safe. Folks don't like suspicious behavior. Suspicious. That word hung heavy. It wasn't about speed, it was about presence. Usain didn't need it spelled out to understand. The problem wasn't the running, it was the runner. His jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet, listening as the man's tone grew sharper. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice as though confiding a secret. We don't usually have your kind running through here. It was said lightly, with a chuckle, the kind of line that could be brushed off as harmless, if not for the venom underneath. Usain heard it clearly. Every syllable chipped at his dignity. My kind, he repeated slowly, refusing to let the words slip by unchallenged. The neighbor shrugged, feigning innocence. Look, I'm just saying, this isn't a track meet. Families live here. Maybe ease up a little. It was a performance of politeness, the kind that masks racism with neighborly concern. But the message was plain. You don't belong. Usain's pulse quickened, not from running, but from rage. The subtle racism was louder than any shout. He looked around, hoping someone had heard, someone would say something. But the park stayed still, silence conspiring with the insult. And then, almost on cue, came the echo. A group of children playing nearby had caught fragments of the exchange. One boy laughed, shouting across the grass, "Slow it down, this isn't a race." Another mimicked the neighbor's stern tone, puffing out his chest. "Running too fast, acting suspicious." The kids giggled, but the laughter carried a cruel edge. They didn't understand the poison laced in their words. But they were learning quickly. Usain's chest tightened. It wasn't just the neighbor. It was how easily prejudice spread, how casually discrimination passed from adult to child. He glanced at the man, who smirked as though vindicated by the chorus. The children's voices turned into a soundtrack of ridicule, one that would follow Usain long after the moment ended. He bit down on the hurt, forcing his hands still. Inside, flames roared. His fists curled, knuckles whitening against the urge to defend himself with words sharp enough to match the insult. But he froze, drawing on discipline that had carried him through every race. Anger would only feed their narrative. Rage would be twisted into proof. He knew it. This was the trap. So he lifted his chin, forcing a mask of calm across his face, though his stomach churned with humiliation. The neighbor tilted his head, waiting for a reaction, craving it. Usain gave none. Silence became his shield, though it burned just as deeply as the insult. Inside, the humiliation smoldered, carving scars invisible to those who caused them. Without a word, Usain turned away. Each step forward felt heavier then. The last, his shoulders bearing the weight of an insult unspoken aloud, but felt all the same. His silence wasn't surrender. It was survival. Yet walking away didn't erase the sting. The laughter of children still rang in his ears, the neighbor's smug face etched in memory. He promised himself one thing. He wouldn't give them the victory of breaking him. But even as he vowed it, a question lingered, cutting deeper than the taunts. Why should he have to endure it all? The wound was invisible, but the ache would not fade. "He doesn't belong here!" The shout cracked through the park like a whip. All heads turned toward the neighbor, his finger jabbing at the jogger as though pointing out a criminal. The venom in his tone was louder than the words themselves. "Look at him," he continued, voice rising with self-righteous authority. "Running like he owns the place, acting like rules don't apply. This is a neighborhood, not some racetrack." Usain's chest still heaved from his run, but not from exhaustion. The words stung, each one designed to strip away dignity in front of strangers. He opened his mouth to respond, but the neighbor cut him off. "People like him come here thinking they can do whatever they want. Not on my watch." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones rose into the air, red recording lights blinking. Some faces registered shock, others indifference. A few turned away, unwilling to get involved. Usain stood rooted, his silence a shield, against the humiliation pressing down on him. He'd endured slights before, but this was a public trial without a crime. And the man shouting at him wore his accusations like a badge of honor. The neighbor's voice sharpened, feeding off the uneasy stillness. Doesn't anyone else see it? Running like that, darting through the park, it's suspicious. He's moving like he's escaping something. Who knows what he was up to before he came here? The words dripped with menace, painting an innocent jogger as a threat. Fear was his weapon, and he wielded it with precision. He could be casing houses, watching families. It happens. Fast running, hiding his face, acting nervous. Doesn't it look off to you? Usain's stomach turned. Every sentence twisted his passion into suspicion, his discipline into danger. He wanted to shout, to demand proof, but the script had already been written. Black man equals threat. He caught fragments from the crowd, soft whispers, uneasy murmurs. Some nodded, convinced by the performance of authority. Others avoided eye contact, unwilling to challenge it. This wasn't a confrontation anymore, it was an indictment. And in that moment, Usain felt the crushing weight of racial profiling at its rawest. His humanity erased, replaced by a stereotype the neighbor paraded for all to see. Phones stayed raised, recording. Yet mouths stayed shut. The bystanders became an audience, unwilling participants in a cruelty they refused to stop. Some muttered just loud enough to be heard. He does look out of place. Why run that fast unless you're hiding something? Others kept their gaze fixed on the ground, their silence betraying complicity. Fear of confrontation silenced them, but that silence became an ally to the accuser. The hypocrisy was suffocating. They would share the video online, express outrage in safety, but here, where courage mattered, they froze. Usain scanned the faces, searching for someone, anyone, to speak up. But the collective quiet screamed louder than the neighbor's tirade. Isolation wrapped around him. Racism wasn't just in the insults. It was in the indifference, the refusal of witnesses to stand beside him. He felt their judgment in every averted glance, every whisper left unchecked. Then, a small voice pierced the tension. Why is everyone yelling at him? He's just running. The question came from a child holding their parent's hand, eyes wide with confusion. The simplicity of it cut deeper than any accusation. For a moment, silence blanketed the park. Grown adults, phones in hand, avoided the child's gaze. The innocence revealed what no one wanted to admit. There was no crime, no danger, only prejudice. The neighbor's mouth tightened, fumbling for words. But the truth hung in the air, undeniable. Usain met the child's eyes, a flicker of gratitude surfacing in the storm. For the first time, someone had spoken truth aloud, unfiltered by fear or bias. Yet the silence that followed showed just how unwilling the crowd was to confront it. The neighbor recovered quickly, doubling down. "I'm calling the police," he barked, pulling out his phone. "This man is suspicious. He's up to something." Suspicious. That word slammed into Usain like a verdict. It wasn't evidence. It was an assumption, sharpened by centuries of fear and wielded like a weapon. "Stay." "Right there," the man ordered, as though Usain had no choice. His tone carried the arrogance of power, the confidence that the law would side with him. Usain froze, not because he was guilty, but because he knew how easily suspicion turned into danger. Headlines flashed in his mind, stories of men stopped, detained or worse, simply for existing. His body, trained to move, now stood trapped by fear. The fastest man alive, forced into stillness, stripped of freedom by a single word. Around him, the division deepened. "I don't think he's doing anything wrong," someone whispered. too quiet for the neighbor to hear. Another shook their head, urging silence, but others nodded in agreement with the accusations. Better safe than sorry. You never know these days. Every comment carved deeper into Usain's isolation. Sympathy without action was useless. Whispers did nothing to stop injustice. The neighbor's voice carried, drowning out the hesitant dissent. The weight of his authority turned opinion into fact, fear into justification. And Usain remained alone in the middle, the subject of a trial where the jury was split, but the verdict already decided. Inside his mind, a storm raged. They don't even see me. They don't know who I am. To them, I'm just another black man to fear. It didn't matter that his name was etched in history, that his speed had brought nations to their feet. Here, stripped of identity, he was invisible, reduced to skin color, nothing more. The humiliation burned sharper than fatigue, sharper than pain. To be celebrated globally, yet erased locally, this was the cruelest betrayal. And so he stood, silent. The fastest man in the world, forced into stillness by prejudice. The humiliation was complete, not through violence, but through words, stares, and the cowardice of silence. At that moment, Usain Bolt felt smaller than he ever had before. "Wait! That's Usain Bolt!" The words burst from a young man's mouth, cutting through the tension like thunder. Heads swiveled, eyes narrowing in disbelief. "No way," someone whispered. "That can't be him." But the jogger finally turned his face fully toward the crowd, sweat still clinging to his brow. Recognition hit like a spark to dry grass. Murmurs swelled. The anonymity that fueled his humiliation shattered in an instant. "That's him, the fastest man alive." A wave of shock rippled outward. The same people who moments ago saw him as suspicious now scrambled to match the face before them with the legend they had cheered on screens. Yet for Usain, the recognition did not erase the sting. Fame could silence doubt, but it could not undo the damage of being judged guilty before proven human. His heart pounded, not from running, but from the brutal reminder that even history-making speed could not outrun prejudice. And as the crowd's energy shifted, all eyes locked on the neighbor who had sparked the storm. "It really is him." Voices overlapped. "Look closer, it's Bolt!" Phones tilted, zooming in. Streams went live, captions screamed. Usain Bolt confronted in neighborhood park. The shift was immediate. Where suspicion had lingered, disbelief now spread. The whispers turned. "I can't believe it. He lives here." How could anyone treat him like that? Each murmur chipped away at the story the neighbor tried to build. The power he held minutes earlier began slipping as quickly as it had come. Usain stood, silent, watching as judgment rearranged itself. Not because they saw his humanity, but because they saw his fame. The irony burned. To be respected only after recognition was no respect at all. Still, the tide was changing, and the man who had once shouted with certainty now shifted uneasily, his authority shrinking with every passing second. I didn't mean it like that," the neighbor stammered, voice stripped of its earlier thunder. "I was just looking out for safety. You know, protecting the neighborhood." His hands flailed, desperate to turn venom into reason. But the crowd wasn't buying it. The excuse rang hollow, the sudden softness exposing his fear. "I wasn't accusing him of anything specific," he added quickly. "I just didn't recognize him. Anyone would have done the same." But the cracks were too visible. Everyone could see the backpedaling, the collapse of certainty. Usain's eyes fixed on him, steady and unblinking. This wasn't about recognition anymore. It was about accountability. Usain finally spoke, his tone calm yet razor-sharp. "Would you have stopped me if I wasn't black?" The question cut through the air, heavier than any insult thrown at him before. The crowd froze, silence stretching long and uncomfortable. The neighbor's mouth opened, then shut. No words came. Excuses wouldn't work here. The truth stood, naked before them all. Because I've lived here for years, Usain continued, voice steady. I've run through these streets every morning. But to you, all you saw was a threat. Not a neighbor, not a man, just my skin. Each word landed. Like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading through the people around them. Racism wasn't hiding anymore. It had been dragged into the open, impossible to deny. And for the first time, the power shifted. His tone never rose, yet it silenced every murmur. Calmness carried more weight than anger ever could. Usain's composure revealed what shouting never would. The ugliness wasn't his to bear. It belonged to the accuser. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten, someone whispered in the crowd. He just asked the one question that matters. That restraint, that quiet strength, disarmed the hostility and flipped the script. Suddenly, the one painted as dangerous was the only one showing grace, and everyone watching knew it. From the back, a young runner stepped out. His voice shook but carried conviction. "Mr. Bolt," he said, "you're the reason I started running. I watched you break records and believed I could chase my dreams too. Seeing you treated like this, it's wrong, completely wrong." The crowd stirred, the spell of silence breaking. Someone finally chose a side. The young man turned toward the neighbor. "You tried to shame the very man who's inspired millions. If he isn't safe jogging here, who is?" Gasps spread. A murmur of agreement followed. For the first time, Usain was no longer alone. The neighbor's authority collapsed piece by piece. Disapproval grew louder, whispers turning into pointed stares. His confidence drained, leaving only a fragile defense no one believed. And Usain, once cornered, now stood taller, not because of fame, but because truth had finally begun to break through prejudice. "Yo, this video is everywhere!" Phones buzzed across the city, timelines flooded with the clip. Millions watched as the neighbor barked accusations, then froze when Usain asked the question that pierced through centuries of silence. "Would you have stopped me if I wasn't black?" The internet erupted. Outrage poured in from every corner. Hashtags trending, athletes and activists reposting, headlines declaring Olympic champion racially profiled in his own neighborhood. "Look at him," a commentator said on live TV. "Dignity in the face of hate. That's power." The lie had unraveled, and the truth was out for the world to see. The neighbor's phone rang non-stop, but not with support. Sponsors pulled out, emails demanded accountability, neighbors signed petitions. By week's end, the news read, HOA President. Steps down after racist confrontation goes viral. His authority dissolved under the weight of his own prejudice. What he thought was control turned into national disgrace. When asked for a comment, his voice faltered. I made a mistake. But the damage was irreversible. For years he wielded power unchallenged. But now the very community he claimed to protect demanded his removal. The fall was swift, public, and complete. For Usain, victory didn't feel like medals or records. It felt like standing still, unbroken, while the world finally saw the truth. Fame didn't protect him from racial profiling, but courage did. "I didn't win because they recognized me," he told a reporter quietly. "I won because I didn't let hate define me." The humiliation still stung, but beneath it lived something stronger. Empowerment. Not the kind born from applause, but from refusing to shrink when injustice tried to make him small. Weeks later, the park no longer carried the same weight of hostility. It became something different, something brighter. Runners of every background gathered there, shoes pounding the same pavement that once carried suspicion. "Bolt ran here," kids whispered with excitement, "and now so do we." The place, once tainted by exclusion, grew into a symbol of unity, where endurance wasn't measured in speed, but in solidarity. The story closed not with silence, but with a spark. They tried to stop a man from running, the final voice declared, steady and unwavering. But instead, he started a movement. And from one act of defiance, an entire community, and soon the world, found its stride. What about you? The voice lingers, challenging the audience directly. If you had stood in that park, would you have spoken up? Or stayed quiet like so many did? Silence carries weight, but action carries change. Every viewer becomes part of the story, asked to confront their own choice. This doesn't end here, the narrator continues. If this story moved you, let your voice be heard. Like, share, and subscribe. Spread it to someone who needs to hear it. Racism thrives in silence, but movements grow through unity. Together, even small actions can echo into something far greater.